They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. But what happens when you're deliberately erased from the most important pictures of your daughter's life? What happens when the very photographer capturing those precious moments is someone you've been quietly supporting all along? Sometimes the most painful lessons come wrapped in white silk and wedding bells. And sometimes the people who should love you most are the ones who hurt you deepest. This is the story of how I discovered that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just an invitation to be used. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains of my Denver townhouse, casting long golden streaks across the hardwood floor. I sat at my kitchen island, a steaming mug of coffee in my hands, staring at the elegant cream-colored envelope that had arrived 3 days ago. The return address was written in my daughter Madison's careful cursive. Madison Claire Thompson and James Robert Mitchell. The wedding invitation. I should have been overjoyed. After all, I'd been dreaming of this day since Madison was 5 years old, spinning around the living room in my old bridesmaid dress, declaring she would have the most beautiful wedding in the whole world. Back then, she'd insisted I would walk her down the aisle since her father had passed when she was just 3. Back then, she'd promised I'd be her maid of honor, her best friend, her everything. But as I held that invitation, all I felt was a hollow ache in my chest. The invitation was beautiful. Expensive cardstock with embossed lettering and delicate botanical illustrations around the border. Everything about it screamed luxury, from the silk ribbon that held the multiple cards, together to the tissue paper that protected each element. I knew exactly how much invitations like this cost, because I'd been quietly funding Madison's wedding dreams for the past 18 months. Not that she knew it. My name is Eleanor Patricia Hartwell, and I'm a 54-year-old widow who spent the last 30 years building a successful event planning business in the heart of Colorado. Hartwell Events had grown from a one-woman operation run out of my garage to a company with 12 employees and a client list that included some of Denver's most prominent families. I specialized in luxury weddings, corporate galas, and milestone celebrations, the kind of events where attention to detail meant everything and budgets were rarely a concern. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd spent decades creating magical moments for other people's families, while watching my own relationship with my daughter slowly unravel. Madison lived in Boulder, about 45 minutes away, in a trendy apartment complex near the University of Colorado, where she worked as a marketing coordinator for a tech startup. At 26, she was beautiful, intelligent, and fiercely independent, traits I'd always admired and encouraged. She had my dark hair and her father's green eyes, and when she smiled, really smiled, she could light up an entire room. The problem was, she rarely smiled like that around me anymore. Our relationship had become a carefully choreographed dance of polite conversations and surface-level updates. She'd call every other Sunday, our conversations following the same predictable pattern. Work was fine, James was wonderful, the weather was nice, and yes, Mom, she was eating enough vegetables. When I'd try to dig deeper, to ask about her hopes, or fears or dreams, she'd skillfully redirect the conversation back to safe, shallow waters. I told myself it was normal. Young adults needed space to become their own people. I'd read enough parenting books to know that some distance was healthy, even necessary, but deep down, I knew our relationship had shifted into something that felt more like obligation than affection. The wedding planning had started innocently enough. Madison had called me last February, her voice bright with excitement, to share the news of James's proposal. They'd been together for 3 years, and I genuinely liked him. He was steady, kind, and clearly adored my daughter. When she mentioned they were hoping for a fall wedding, I'd immediately offered my services. "Mom, that's sweet, but we want to handle this ourselves," she'd said, that familiar note of polite dismissal creeping into her voice. James and I are adults. We don't need you to plan our wedding." The words had stung more than I cared to admit, but I'd swallowed my hurt and offered my congratulations instead. If Madison wanted to plan her own wedding, I would respect that decision. I'd learned over the years that pushing too hard only drove her further away. But as the months passed, I began to notice things. Madison looked tired whenever I saw her, stress lines appearing around her eyes that hadn't been there before. When I'd casually ask how the planning was going, she'd give vague responses about everything being under control, while unconsciously massaging her temples. James, normally talkative and warm, seemed subdued during their brief visits, and I caught him checking his phone with worried expressions when he thought no one was looking. It was my business partner and oldest friend, Carol Brennan, who finally spelled it out for me over lunch one Tuesday afternoon. "Eleanor, honey, you're being willfully blind," Carol said, setting down her salad fork and giving me one of her no-nonsense looks. We were sitting at our favorite corner table at Bistro Vendôme, the same place we'd been meeting for lunch every Tuesday for the past 8 years. Carol was 62, silver-haired, and had zero patience for what she called emotional tiptoeing. "What do you mean?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "That girl is drowning in wedding debt, and you're sitting here pretending not to notice." Carol leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I ran into Sarah Martinez at the grocery store last weekend. You remember Sarah? She works at that fancy venue in Aspen that Madison toured? The one with the mountain views and the ridiculous price tag?" I nodded, my stomach beginning to tighten. Sarah mentioned that Madison put down a deposit but had to ask for an extended payment plan. Apparently, the girl was almost in tears, explaining that she and James were trying to save money but really wanted their dream wedding. Carol paused, studying my face. "Eleanor, that venue costs $40,000 just for the location rental. That's not including catering, flowers, photography, or anything else." I stared down at my untouched soup, processing this information. Madison and James were both in their mid-20s with entry-level salaries. Even together, their combined income was probably around $70,000 a year. After rent, student loans, car payments, and basic living expenses, there was no way they could afford a wedding that would easily cost twice their annual income. "There's more," Carol continued gently. "I also heard through the grapevine that Madison's been asking around for photographer recommendations in the budget range of $800 to $1,000. My heart sank. In the luxury wedding market, $800 wouldn't get you a photographer's assistant, let alone the kind of professional coverage that Madison had always dreamed about. I knew this because I'd spent years working with the best photographers in Colorado, and I understood exactly what quality cost. She's probably planning to ask family members to take pictures with their phones as backup," Carol added. "Oh, Eleanor, that beautiful girl is going to end up with cell phone photos of the most important day of her life because she's too proud to ask for help." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Madison had always been independent, sometimes to a fault. Even as a child, she'd insisted on doing things herself, getting frustrated when I tried to help with homework or school projects. "I can do it, Mom," had been her constant refrain, even when she clearly couldn't. I understood her need for independence. I'd raised her to be strong and self-sufficient, especially after losing her father so young. But there was a difference between healthy independence and stubborn pride that would result in lifelong regret. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything, though I didn't know it at the time. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Marcus Rivera, one of the most talented wedding photographers in the Rocky Mountain region. Marcus and I had a history that went back 15 years. When he was just starting out as a photographer's assistant, barely making ends meet and sleeping on friends' couches, I'd taken a chance on him for a mid-budget wedding. His work had been extraordinary. He had an eye for capturing authentic emotions and candid moments that told a story. I'd continued to recommend him as his career grew, and over the years, we'd developed a friendship built on mutual respect and shared artistic vision. "Eleanor," Marcus's warm voice came through the phone. "How are you, my friend? It's been too long." "I'm well, Marcus. Listen, I have a proposition for you, but I need you to hear me out completely before you respond." I explained the situation, carefully, leaving out the more painful details about my strained relationship with Madison. I told him about her upcoming wedding, her limited budget, and my desire to ensure she had beautiful photographs without her knowing I was involved. "I want to hire you to photograph Madison's wedding," I said. "Your full package, no compromises. But I need this to remain completely confidential. As far as Madison and James are concerned, you're offering them a heavily discounted rate because you're trying to build your portfolio in mountain venues." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Eleanor, you know my full wedding package runs $12,000, right? And you want me to tell them I'm charging whatever amount would seem reasonable to them. 1,000? 1,500? I'll pay the difference, plus a bonus for the inconvenience of this arrangement." "It's not about the money," Marcus said softly. "It's about understanding why you feel you need to hide this from your own daughter." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar ache in my chest. Because if she knew I was helping, she'd say no. She'd rather have mediocre photos than accept what she'd see as charity from her mother. "And you're okay with that? With her never knowing what you did for her?" "I'm okay with her having the wedding she deserves," I replied. "Sometimes love means staying invisible," Marcus agreed, though I could hear the concern in his voice. Within a week, he'd reached out to Madison, explaining that he'd heard about her wedding through mutual connections and was offering a special rate because he wanted to expand his portfolio of mountain venue weddings. The special rate he quoted was $1,800, still a stretch for their budget, but manageable if they cut costs elsewhere. Madison called me that evening, her voice more animated than I'd heard it in months. "Mom, you'll never believe. What happened? This amazing photographer contacted us out of nowhere and offered to do our wedding for way less than his normal rate. I looked at his portfolio online, and his work is incredible. Like, seriously incredible. James and I can't believe our luck." I made appropriate excited noises and asked to see his portfolio, even though I'd been familiar with Marcus's work for years. As Madison scrolled through his website on her laptop during our video call, pointing out shots that took her breath away, I felt a warm glow of satisfaction. This was what I'd wanted, to see her genuinely happy and excited about her wedding. "He specializes in those candid, emotional shots that tell a story," Madison continued, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Look at this one. You can see the exact moment the bride's father realizes he's about to cry, and this one of the flower girl getting distracted by a butterfly. It's like he captures all the real moments, not just the posed stuff." "He sounds perfect for your vision," I said, and I meant it. "The only thing is, he's pretty particular about the shot list and timeline. He sent over this detailed questionnaire about family dynamics and who we want featured prominently in the photos." Madison's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. "There are a lot of questions about parents and family relationships." I felt my stomach tighten, but I kept my voice casual. "That makes sense. Family photos are usually a big part of wedding coverage." "Yeah, I guess. It's just..." Madison paused, chewing her bottom lip the way she had since she was a little girl. Some of his questions made me think about things I hadn't really considered. "What kind of things?" Like, he asked about the family dynamics during the ceremony and reception, who would be walking me down the aisle, who I wanted in the formal family portraits, that sort of thing. She looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact even through the video call. I realized I haven't really thought through all the logistics of family photos. I waited, sensing there was more she wanted to say. "The thing is, Mom," Madison continued slowly, "James's family is really close-knit, like really close. His parents have been married for 30 years. He has 2 brothers and a sister, and they all genuinely like spending time together. When we visit them, it's this whole big production with family dinners and game nights and everyone talking over each other in the best way. She paused, and I saw a flicker of something, sadness, regret, cross her face. When I think about our family, photos, it's just going to be you and me, and James's family with their perfect family dynamics, and then us looking like this sad little incomplete unit. Her voice had dropped to almost a whisper. Sometimes I think it might be easier to just focus on James's family for the formal shots. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I forced myself to keep my expression neutral. Madison, honey, every family is different. There's nothing sad or incomplete about us. I know. It's not about you, Mom. It's just... She sighed, running her hands through her hair. I don't want our family photos to highlight what's missing instead of celebrating what's there. What's missing? The phrase echoed in my mind long after we ended the call. I understood what she meant. The absence of her father, the small size of our family unit, the lack of siblings and extended relatives that would fill out a traditional family portrait. But hearing her describe our family as something that highlighted absence rather than presence cut deeper than I'd expected. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my back deck, looking out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. The September air carried a hint of the coming autumn, and I pulled a blanket around my shoulders as I tried to process Madison's words. I'd spent 23 years building a life for us after David died. I'd worked 14-hour days to establish my business, not just for the financial security, but to create something meaningful I could eventually pass on to Madison if she wanted it. I'd attended every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every soccer game. I'd been room mother, carpooling coordinator, and emergency contact for half of Madison's classmates. But somehow, all of that had been reduced to highlighting what was missing. I thought about the countless weddings I'd coordinated over the years, watching other families navigate the complex dynamics of blending traditions and managing expectations. I'd seen families torn apart by seating charts and brought together by unexpected moments of grace. I'd learned that weddings had a way of illuminating every fault line in family relationships, bringing both the best and worst to the surface. Maybe Madison was right to want to minimize our family presence in the photos. Maybe it would be easier for everyone if I simply faded into the background, letting James's large, happy family take center stage while I smiled politely from the sidelines. But even as I tried to convince myself that this was practical and selfless, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was breaking between us, that in trying to give Madison the space she needed to become her own person, I'd somehow become expendable in her life. The irony was bitter and sharp. I was paying for a photographer to capture the most important day of my daughter's life, and she was actively planning to minimize my presence in those very photographs. As I sat there in the growing darkness, I realized this was about more than wedding photos. This was about a pattern that had been developing for years. Me giving quietly from the shadows while Madison moved forward without looking back, unaware of the support that had been holding her up all along. I finished my wine and went inside, the weight of this realization settling over me like a heavy blanket. Tomorrow, I would continue planning behind the scenes, coordinating details and solving problems that Madison would never know existed. I would smile and offer advice when asked, step back when dismissed, and pretend that my heart wasn't breaking just a little more each day. Because that's what mothers do, isn't it? We love from the shadows, give without recognition, and hope that somehow love will be enough. But as I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I couldn't help wondering, at what point does selfless love become self-erasure? And how long can you support someone who doesn't even want you in the picture? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The weeks following Madison's photographer announcement blurred together in a haze of secret coordination and careful distance. I found myself living a double life, publicly respecting my daughter's independence while privately orchestrating the wedding she'd always dreamed of but couldn't afford. It started small. When Madison casually mentioned during one of our Sunday calls that the florist she'd contacted was asking for a 50% deposit that wouldn't fit into their monthly budget, I waited exactly 3 days before calling Rosalind's garden myself. "Hello. This is Eleanor Hartwell from Hartwell Events," I said to the shop owner, a woman named Carmen Torres whom I'd worked with on several high-profile weddings. "I understand you're working with Madison Thompson on her October wedding?" "Oh, yes, lovely girl," Carmen replied warmly. "Though I'm afraid we're having some scheduling complications. She wants absolutely gorgeous arrangements, cascading white roses with eucalyptus and baby's breath. But the timing of her payments doesn't align with our ordering schedule for premium flowers." I took a deep breath. "What if I told you that Hartwell Events wanted to sponsor a showcase wedding this fall? We'd cover the floral costs in exchange for the right to photograph your arrangements for our portfolio and use them in our marketing materials." It was a complete fabrication, but one that served everyone's interests. Carmen would get paid up front. Madison would get her dream flowers, and I would get to give my daughter something beautiful without her knowledge. "That sounds wonderful," Carmen said after a brief pause. "I'll call Madison and let her know about this unexpected opportunity." 3 days later, Madison called me, practically breathless with excitement. "Mom, the craziest thing happened. You know that florist I told you about? Well, apparently some event planning company wants to use my wedding as a showcase, and they're covering all the floral costs. Can you believe it? Carmen said it's because the venue and the timing are perfect for their portfolio needs." I made appropriately surprised and delighted noises while my heart twisted with the familiar combination of joy and sadness that had become my constant companion. Joy because Madison was getting what she wanted. Sadness because I had to hide behind lies to give it to her. "That's incredible, sweetheart. What kind of arrangements are you getting?" For the next 20 minutes, Madison described her floral vision in detail. The bridal bouquet, the bridesmaids' flowers, the ceremony arch, the centerpieces. Every element she described was exactly what I would have chosen for her, and probably cost more than she made in 3 months. After we hung up, I sat in my home office, staring at the stack of wedding vendor contracts I'd been secretly managing. The list had grown longer than I'd initially planned. Marcus Rivera, photography, $12,000. Madison believes she's paying $1,800. Carmen Torres, florist, $8,500. Madison believes it's sponsored. Bella Vista Catering, upgraded menu, $6,200. Difference between what Madison ordered and what she'd actually receive. Mountain Peak Transportation, luxury shuttle service, $2,800. Madison thinks the venue includes basic transportation. Sarah Chen, string quartet, $3,200. Madison believes they're music students playing for experience. The total I'd spent so far was just over $32,000, and Madison had no idea any of it existed. Each vendor had been given a carefully crafted story about why they were offering discounted services. The caterer thought Madison was part of a social media collaboration. The transportation company believed it was a trial run for their new luxury package. The string quartet was told that Hartwell Events was documenting their performance for promotional purposes. The lies were multiplying, but so was Madison's happiness. For the first time in years, she seemed genuinely excited to talk to me, calling with updates about dress fittings and cake tastings, sharing photos of invitation samples, and asking my opinion on makeup styles. "I feel like the luckiest bride in the world," she said during one of our conversations. "Everything is just falling into place perfectly. It's like the universe is conspiring to give me my dream wedding." If only she knew how literally true that was. The pattern had started years earlier, though I hadn't recognized it at the time. When Madison was in college, she'd mentioned struggling to afford textbooks for her senior year courses. I'd wanted to help directly, but she'd firmly declined any financial assistance. "I need to do this myself, Mom. I'm an adult." So I'd contacted the university bookstore and anonymously purchased gift cards worth $800, asking them to call Madison and tell her she'd won a random drawing for students with high GPAs. The next week, she'd called me, ecstatic about her incredible luck and how she'd be able to buy all her books, plus some art supplies she'd been wanting. When she'd needed interview clothes for her job search after graduation, I'd arranged for a local boutique owner, a former client, to call Madison about being a fit model for their professional wear line. Madison spent a day modeling clothes that I'd pre-selected and pre-purchased, walking away with an entire interview wardrobe she believed she'd earned through her modeling work. After she'd gotten her first job and was struggling with the security deposit for her apartment, I'd convinced her landlord to offer her a new graduate special that reduced her deposit by exactly the amount she was short. The landlord, who managed properties for several of my clients, was happy to accommodate the request when I explained the situation. Each time, I told myself it was just a small help, a gentle nudge from the universe that happened to be funded by her mother. Madison never questioned these strokes of good fortune. She was young and optimistic, the kind of person who believed that good things happen to good people. But as the wedding planning intensified, I began to see the full scope of what I'd created. Madison had grown accustomed to a certain level of luck, to having things work out in ways that stretched her budget just enough to get what she wanted. She'd learned to expect miracles without ever questioning their source. Carol noticed the change in me during one of our Tuesday lunches. We were sitting at our usual table, but I'd barely touched my soup, my mind occupied with coordinating the final details of the string quartet's audition for Madison's wedding. "You look exhausted," Carol said bluntly, setting down her fork and studying my face. "And you've lost weight. What's going on?" I gave her a wan smile. "Just busy season. You know how it is with fall weddings. Eleanor Patricia Hartwell, I've known you for 15 years, and I've never seen you this stressed about work." Carol leaned forward, lowering her voice. "This is about Madison's wedding, isn't it? How much are you spending?" I hesitated, then told her. Carol's eyes widened as the number grew, and by the time I finished, she was staring at me with a mixture of concern and disbelief. $32,000? Eleanor, that's more than some people spend on their entire wedding. "It's Madison's wedding," I said defensively. "I want it to be perfect for her." "But she doesn't even know you're doing it. You're spending a fortune to give your daughter a gift she can't thank you for, from a mother she's trying to keep at arm's length." Carol's voice was gentle but firm. "Honey, what happens when this is over? What happens when Madison gets used to having everything she wants without understanding what it costs?" I didn't have an answer for that, mainly because I'd been trying not to think about it. The wedding was in 6 weeks, and after that, what? Would I continue manufacturing miracles for Madison for the rest of her life? Would I keep hiding in the shadows, orchestrating her happiness while remaining invisible? "I just want her to be happy," I said quietly. "But what about your happiness? When do you get to stop giving in secret and start receiving love openly?" Carol's words followed me home and haunted my dreams that night. I woke up at 3 a.m. with a knot in my stomach, suddenly remembering something Madison had said during our last conversation. She'd been telling me about her final dress fitting, describing how perfect everything looked, when she'd added almost casually, "You know, Mom, I feel like I've been really blessed lately. Like, really blessed. All these amazing things keep happening. The photographer, the flowers, everything. It makes me think that maybe I don't need as much help as I thought. I did. Maybe I'm better at handling things on my own than I gave myself credit for." The pride in her voice had been unmistakable. Madison genuinely believed that her good fortune was the result of her own competence and resourcefulness. In trying to give her everything she wanted I'd inadvertently convinced her that she didn't need me at all. That realization led to another, more painful one. I wasn't just enabling Madison's independence, I was funding my own obsolescence. The next morning, I found myself standing in front of my bathroom mirror, really looking at myself for the first time in months. Carol was right. I had lost weight, and not in a healthy way. My face looked drawn, my eyes shadowed with exhaustion. I'd been so focused on orchestrating Madison's happiness that I'd forgotten to take care of my own basic needs. My phone buzzed with a text from Madison. "Final venue walkthrough today. Can't believe it's only 5 weeks away. Everything is going to be so perfect. The word that had driven so many of my decisions, the standard I'd been trying to meet for my daughter without her even knowing I was trying. I thought about the conversation I'd had with Marcus Rivera the week before. He'd called to discuss the timeline for the wedding day, but our conversation had taken an unexpected turn. "Eleanor, I have to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly," Marcus had said. "Are you okay with how this is playing out?" "What do you mean?" "I mean that I'm going to be spending the entire day photographing your daughter's wedding, capturing every moment of joy and celebration, and she's going to be actively trying to minimize your presence in those photographs." His voice was careful, but direct. "I've been thinking about what you told me, about her wanting to focus on James's family for the formal shots. As her photographer, I'll have to respect her wishes, which means I'll be in very few pictures from my daughter's wedding day," I finished. "Yeah, and I'm having trouble understanding how you're okay with that." I'd been quiet for a long moment before answering. "Marcus, I've spent 23 years learning that sometimes loving Madison means accepting that she doesn't want my love in the ways I want to give it." "But this isn't about the way you're giving love," Marcus had replied. "This is about her not recognizing that you're giving it at all. There's a difference between respecting someone's independence and being completely invisible in their life." His words had stayed with me, adding to the growing collection of uncomfortable truths I'd been trying to avoid. Now, standing in my bathroom on a Wednesday morning, getting ready for another day of secret wedding coordination, I finally allowed myself to ask the question I'd been avoiding. What was I really accomplishing? Madison was happy, yes, but her happiness was built on a foundation of illusions I'd carefully constructed. She believed she was independent and capable, but only because I'd been smoothing every obstacle from her path. She felt blessed by the universe, but only because I'd been playing the role of a fairy godmother she didn't know existed. And where did that leave me? Exhausted, financially depleted, and more distant from my daughter than ever. The harder I worked to give Madison what she wanted, the less she seemed to need me. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed Madison's number, and I answered with my usual bright tone. "Mom, I need your advice about something," Madison said, sounding slightly stressed. My heart lifted. Finally, something she actually wanted my input on. "Of course. Honey, what's going on?" "It's about the seating chart for the reception. James's family is so big, and they all want to sit together, but that takes up like 3 tables. And then there's his college friends, and my work friends, and our couple friends." She paused, and I could hear papers rustling. "The problem is I'm trying to figure out where to put you, where to put me. As if I were a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit anywhere. I mean, obviously you'll be at the family table," Madison continued. "But James's parents will be there, and his siblings and their spouses, and it's going to be this big, loud, happy family group. And then there's just you. Just me. Again. I don't want you to feel awkward or left out," Madison added quickly. "But I also don't want to put you at a random table with people you don't know. Maybe I should put you with my work friends. You met Sarah and Jennifer at my birthday party last year." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar ache in my chest. Even surrounded by a wedding I'd secretly funded, I would still be the odd one out. The single mom who didn't quite fit into the perfect family picture Madison was creating. "Whatever you think is best, sweetheart," I managed to say. "I just want you to have a wonderful day." "You're the best, Mom. I knew you'd understand. You always make things so easy." Easy. Because I never complained, never asked for more, never demanded the recognition or appreciation that I desperately wanted. After we hung up, I sat down at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. On the screen was an email from the wedding venue's coordinator, asking for final payment details for the upgraded catering package, the package Madison thought she was getting for free as part of a promotion. I stared at the invoice. $6,200 for upgraded menu selections, premium linens, and additional service staff. Money that would come out of my retirement savings so that Madison could have the reception she'd dreamed of, while I sat at a table with her work colleagues, pretending to be grateful for a seat at the feast I'd purchased. For the first time since this whole secret wedding planning had begun, I allowed myself to feel angry, not at Madison exactly, but at the situation I'd created. I'd taught my daughter that love meant never having to acknowledge the cost, that support should be invisible, that independence meant never having to say thank you because you never knew there was anything to be grateful for. I'd turned myself into a ghost in my own daughter's life, present but unacknowledged, giving but unrecognized, loving but unloved in return. And the worst part was, I'd done it all in the name of love, the way. Phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning in early September, exactly 4 weeks before Madison's wedding. I was in my office, reviewing vendor contracts and coordinating final details, when my assistant Jennifer knocked on my door. "Mrs. Hartwell? There's a James Mitchell online, too. He says he's your daughter's fiancé and needs to speak with you urgently." My stomach immediately tightened. James had never called me directly, and the word urgently sent my mind racing through possible catastrophes. Had something happened to Madison? Was there a problem with the wedding venue? "James?" I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is everything okay?" "Mrs. Hartwell, hi. Sorry to bother you at work, but He paused, and I could hear the stress in his voice. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course. What's going on?" James took a deep breath. "Do you know anything about Madison's wedding vendors? Like, have you been in contact with any of them?" The question hit me like a cold wave. I gripped the phone tighter, my mind scrambling for the right response. "What do you mean?" "I mean that some really weird things have been happening, and Madison doesn't seem to notice, but I do." James's voice was careful but determined. "Yesterday, I went with Madison to the final catering meeting. The coordinator kept slipping up and calling our wedding the Hartwell Showcase event. When I asked what that meant, she got flustered and said she misspoke. My heart was racing, but I tried to keep my voice casual. That is strange. Maybe she was thinking about another event? That's what I thought at first. But then last week, when we were at the venue for our walkthrough, the manager mentioned something about Mrs. Hartwell's special arrangements. When Madison asked what he meant, he also claimed he misspoke. Was quiet, trying to process how much James might have figured out. "Mrs. Hartwell, I work in data analysis. I notice patterns. And the pattern I'm seeing is that your name keeps coming up in connection with our wedding vendors, even though Madison thinks she's handling everything herself." There was a long silence. Finally, James continued, his voice gentler now. "I also called the photographer yesterday, Marcus Rivera. I wanted to discuss some additional shots I'd thought of, but when I mentioned the special rate he was giving us, he sounded confused. He asked me what I meant by special rate, and when I told him we were paying $1,800, he went completely quiet. My blood ran cold. Marcus must have slipped up somehow. "James, Mrs. Hartwell, please. I'm not angry. And I'm not going to tell Madison unless you want me to, but I need to understand what's happening here. Are you paying for our wedding?" The words hung in the air between us, and I realized there was no point in continuing the charade, at least not with James. He was too observant, too analytical, and too persistent to be fooled by the stories I'd been crafting. "Not all of it," I said quietly. "Just some parts." "How much is some parts?" I closed my eyes. "Around $35,000. The silence that followed was so long I wondered if the call had dropped. "Jesus," James finally whispered. "Mrs. Hartwell, that's more than Madison and I make together in half a year." "I know." "Why? And why keep it secret?" I leaned back in my chair, suddenly feeling every one of my 54 years. "Because if Madison knew, she wouldn't accept it. She'd rather have a courthouse wedding than what she'd see as charity from her mother. But this isn't charity. This is huge. This is life-changing generosity. To you, maybe. To Madison, it would be proof that I don't think she's capable of handling her own life." James was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Hartwell, can I ask you something else?" "Go ahead." "Why do you think Madison would see it that way?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on the what and the how of Madison's independence that I'd never really examined the why. "She's always been very independent," I said slowly. "Even as a child, she hated being helped. She wanted to do everything herself." "But there's a difference between independence and pride," James said gently. "And there's also a difference between helping someone and hiding from them." His words stung because they were true. "James, I just want her to be happy." "I know you do. But Mrs. Hartwell, Madison is planning a wedding that she thinks represents her and my ability to create something beautiful together. She's proud of what we've accomplished, proud of how we've stretched our budget and made smart choices. If she found out that none of it was real—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. I could imagine Madison's reaction, the humiliation, the anger, the sense of betrayal that would come with learning that her independence had been an illusion. "Are you going to tell her?" I asked. "I don't know," James said honestly. "Part of me thinks she deserves to know, but part of me is terrified of what it would do to her, especially this close to the wedding." "And what about what it would do to us?" I asked quietly. "To my relationship with Madison?" James sighed. "Mrs. Hartwell, I have to ask, what relationship? When's the last time Madison called you just to talk? When's the last time she asked for your advice about something important? When's the last time she said she missed you?" Each question was like a small knife, cutting away the pretenses I'd been clinging to. "She calls every Sunday," I said weakly. "Duty calls," James replied. "That's not the same thing." After we hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring out the window at the Denver skyline. James's questions echoed in my mind, forcing me to confront truths I'd been avoiding. When was the last time Madison had called just to talk? I couldn't remember. Our conversations had become ritualistic exchanges of basic information: weather, work, health. She never shared her fears or dreams or daily frustrations. She never asked about my life beyond the surface details. When was the last time she'd asked for my advice? The wedding planning had been specifically designed to exclude me. Before that, I struggled to think of a single instance in the past 2 years when Madison had sought my guidance on anything meaningful. When was the last time she'd said she missed me? I couldn't recall her ever saying those words, even during her college years when we were separated by distance. The realization was devastating. I had been working so hard to remain connected to Madison's life that I'd failed to notice that the connection had been severed long ago. I was pouring love and money and energy into a relationship that existed largely in my own imagination. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I drove to Madison's apartment unannounced. I knew it was risky. Madison valued her privacy and had made it clear that she preferred planned visits. But James's phone call had shaken something loose in me, and I needed to see my daughter with fresh eyes. I needed to understand what our relationship really looked like from the outside. Madison's apartment complex was one of those modern developments, with artificial stone facades and names like the Peaks at Harmony Heights. I'd helped her find it 2 years ago, back when she was still occasionally asking for my input on major decisions. Now, as I walked through the lobby with its generic mountain-themed artwork and fake gas fireplace, I felt like a stranger in a place that should have been familiar. I knocked on apartment 3B and waited. When the door opened, Madison's face went through a rapid sequence of expressions: surprise, confusion, and something that might have been annoyance. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by," I lied. "Is this a bad time?" Madison glanced back into the apartment, and I could hear voices: James and at least one other person. "We're having dinner with some friends," Madison said, not moving aside to let me in. "Maybe we could plan something for this weekend instead." Over her shoulder, I could see into the living room where James sat at a small dining table with another couple I didn't recognize. The scene looked cozy and intimate. Candles on the table, wine glasses, the remnants of what appeared to be a home-cooked meal. "Of course," I said, stepping back. "I should have called first." "It's okay, Mom. It's just that we already have the table set for 4 and—" Madison trailed off, looking uncomfortable. The message was clear. There wasn't room for me in this picture, literally or figuratively. "I understand. Have a lovely evening." As I walked back to my car, I could hear laughter drifting from Madison's apartment. Easy, comfortable laughter between friends who enjoyed each other's company. I tried to remember the last time Madison and I had laughed together like that, and came up empty. Driving home through the darkening streets of Boulder, I finally allowed myself to see what had been in front of me all along. Madison hadn't been gradually pulling away from me over the years. She'd been holding me at arm's length, keeping our relationship surface level and manageable. The polite Sunday phone calls, the brief holiday visits, the careful way she shared. Just enough information to seem connected without actually being vulnerable. I'd told myself that this was normal young adult behavior, that she needed space to build her own life. But what if it wasn't about space? What if it was about genuine discomfort with closeness? What if Madison simply didn't want the kind of relationship I'd been trying to maintain? The thought was terrifying, because it suggested that all my secret wedding coordination, all my years of manufacturing miracles and staying invisible, had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding. I'd been trying to preserve a relationship that Madison might not have wanted preserved. When I got home, I found a voicemail waiting on my landline. The caller ID showed Marcus Rivera's number. "Eleanor, it's Marcus. I need to talk to you about something important. James Mitchell called me today asking about the photography pricing. I think I may have inadvertently revealed more than I should have. Could you call me back when you get this? I'm concerned about how this might affect things." I didn't call Marcus back that night. Instead, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea, looking at the framed photos that covered my side tables and mantelpiece. Most of them were of Madison: school pictures, graduation photos, candid shots from various holidays and birthdays. In almost every picture, Madison was smiling. But as I studied them more closely, I began to notice something I'd never seen before. In the older photos, from her childhood and early teens, Madison's smiles reached her eyes. There was genuine joy and connection in her expression, especially in the pictures where we were together. But as the photos progressed chronologically, something changed. Madison's smiles became more practiced, more polite. In the recent photos, she looked like she was posing rather than genuinely enjoying herself. When had that shift happened? When had my daughter's genuine affection been replaced by dutiful politeness? I thought about the conversation I'd overheard at her birthday party the previous year. I'd arrived early to help set up, and Madison had been on the phone with someone, probably one of her bridesmaids, discussing the guest list. My mom's coming, obviously, Madison had said. But I'm hoping she won't stay too long. You know how she gets? She tries to help with everything and ends up taking over. It's easier when she just makes an appearance and then leaves. At the time, I'd told myself she was just trying to assert her independence as a hostess. Now, I wondered if it was something deeper, if my presence had become something Madison tolerated rather than enjoyed. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was James. Mrs. Hartwell? I hope it's not too late to call. Not at all. How was your dinner? It was nice. But I've been thinking about our conversation today, and I realized I need to tell you something else. I braced myself. Madison doesn't know I figured out about the wedding expenses, but she's not, oblivious to the fact that things have been going unusually well for her lately. Last week, she made a comment about how lucky she's been, how everything seems to be falling into place perfectly. That's good, isn't it? Maybe. But then she said something that bothered me. She said, "It's nice to finally feel like I can handle my life without needing anyone's help. I'm proud of how independent James and I have become." The words hit me like a physical blow. Madison's pride in her independence was built entirely on help she didn't know she was receiving. Mrs. Hartwell, I think there's something you need to understand about Madison, James continued gently. She's not just independent by nature. She's kind of afraid of being dependent on anyone, especially you. What do you mean? She's told me about growing up after her dad died, how hard you worked, how much you sacrificed. She has a lot of guilt about that, about how much of your life was focused on taking care of her instead of taking care of yourself. This was news to me. Madison had never expressed any guilt about our life together after David's death. She's mentioned feeling like she was the reason you never remarried, never traveled, never pursued your own dreams. She said that by the time she was old enough to understand what you'd given up for her, it felt too late to change anything. I was speechless. So now I think she's trying to prove, to herself and to you, that she doesn't need to be a burden anymore. That she can succeed without requiring any more sacrifices from you. But I never saw her as a burden, I whispered. I know. But she sees herself that way. And Mrs. Hartwell, if she found out about all the money you've been spending on the wedding, I think it would confirm her worst fears about herself. That she's still taking from you, still preventing you from living your own life. After James hung up, I sat in the darkness of my living room, finally understanding the full scope of what I'd created. In trying to give Madison everything she wanted while respecting her desire for independence, I'd created a situation where she would inevitably feel betrayed and manipulated when the truth came out. But the truth was already coming out, piece by piece, and I was powerless to stop it. The confrontation came on a Friday afternoon, 3 weeks before the wedding, in the most unexpected way possible. I was at Bella Vista Catering, meeting with the head chef to finalize the upgraded menu that Madison believed was part of a promotional package. The meeting was supposed to be routine, confirming dietary restrictions, reviewing the timeline for service, ensuring every detail was perfect for Madison's special day. But as I sat in the catering company's small conference room, reviewing itemized lists of hors d'oeuvres and entree options that cost more than most people's monthly rent, I heard familiar voices in the hallway outside. "I just want to double-check the final head count and make sure we have the timeline right," Madison's voice carried through the thin walls. "This is literally the most important day of my life, and I want everything to be perfect." My blood turned to ice. Madison wasn't supposed to be here. According to our last conversation, she and James were spending the afternoon looking at honeymoon destinations. The catering meeting was scheduled specifically to avoid any chance of overlap. "Of course, Miss Thompson," came the voice of Sophia Martinez, the catering coordinator. "Let me just grab your file from the conference room, and we can go over everything." I heard footsteps approaching the door, and panic flooded my system. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to go. The conference room had only one exit, and Sophia was about to walk through it. The door opened, and Sophia stepped inside, stopping short. When she saw me sitting at the table with vendor contracts spread in front of me, "Oh," Sophia said, her face going pale. "Mrs. Hartwell, I didn't realize you were still here." Before I could respond, Madison appeared in the doorway behind Sophia, and our eyes met across the small room. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Madison looked confused, scanning the scene. Me at the table, Sophia's obvious discomfort, the papers scattered in front of me that clearly had nothing to do with any event other than her wedding. "Mom?" Madison's voice was small, uncertain. "What are you doing here?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How do you explain the unexplainable? How do you justify the unjustifiable? Sophia, bless her, tried to save the situation. Mrs. Hartwell she was reviewing some details for another event. A coincidence that you're both here today. But Madison had inherited my eye for detail, and she was already studying the papers on the table. I watched her face change as she recognized her name on the documents, saw the upgraded menu items she'd been told were complimentary, noticed the payment authorizations with my signature. "Madison, I can explain," I started, but she held up a hand to stop me. "Sophia, could you give us a moment, please?" Madison's voice was deadly calm, which somehow was worse than if she'd been shouting. Sophia practically fled the room, closing the door behind her and leaving Madison and me alone in a space that suddenly felt airless. Madison moved slowly to the chair across from me and sat down. She reached for one of the contracts, the menu upgrade authorization, and read it carefully. When she finished, she set it down and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was something colder and more devastating. Complete betrayal. "Upgraded cocktail service," Madison read from the paper. "Premium linens, additional waitstaff, enhanced dessert presentation." She looked up at me. "All authorized by Eleanor P. Hartwell. All paid for by Eleanor P. Hartwell." "Madison, don't." Her voice cut through my attempt to speak. "Just don't. Let me think for a minute." She picked up another paper, then another, her eyes scanning each document with growing comprehension. I watched her piece together the scope of what I'd done, saw the exact moment when she understood that nothing about her wedding was what she'd believed it to be. "The photographer," she said finally. "Marcus Rivera. James told me he asked about our special rate, and Marcus seemed confused." I nodded miserably. "The flowers. That portfolio showcase that Carmen mentioned." Another nod. "The transportation. The string quartet. Everything." Madison's voice was barely above a whisper. Everything I thought I was accomplishing on my own. Everything I was proud of managing with James. None of it was real. "Madison, please let me explain why." "Why?" Madison's composure finally cracked and her voice rose. "Why what, Mom? Why you've been lying to me for months? Why you've been making me feel like an idiot who can't see the obvious? Why you've been letting me believe I was capable and independent, when really I'm just a puppet you've been controlling from behind the scenes?" The words hit like physical blows, each one landing exactly where it would hurt most. "That's not what I was doing," I said desperately. "I just wanted you to have the wedding you dreamed of." "No." Madison stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "You wanted to give me the wedding you thought I should have. You wanted to be the hero of my story without me even knowing there was a story. I wanted you to be happy. You wanted to feel needed," Madison shot back, and the truth of it hit me like a slap. "You couldn't stand that I was handling my own life, so you had to create problems you could secretly solve. You had to make yourself indispensable by being invisible." I stared at her, seeing myself clearly for the first time through her eyes. The loving mother I'd imagined myself to be looked very different from Madison's perspective. Manipulative, controlling, unable to respect boundaries or accept her daughter's autonomy. "How much?" Madison asked quietly. "What? How much money have you spent on my wedding without telling me?" I hesitated, and Madison's eyes flashed with fresh anger. "How much, Mom?" "Around $38,000, I whispered. Madison's face went completely white. She gripped the back of her chair as if she might fall without it. $38,000, she repeated. That's more than I make in a year. That's more than James and I together make in a year. I know it sounds like a lot. It doesn't sound like a lot, Mom. It is a lot. It's an enormous amount of money. Madison's voice was shaking now. Money that you've been spending to manipulate my life while I've been calling you every Sunday, to tell you how proud I am of how well James and I are managing everything. The irony was devastating. Every proud update Madison had given me about their progress, every excited phone call about how well things were falling into place, every moment of happiness she'd shared about her independence, all of it had been built on my deception. I never meant for it to feel like manipulation, I said weakly. But that's exactly what it was. Madison began pacing the small room, her energy needing an outlet. "Do you understand what this means? Do you understand what you've done?" I shook, my head afraid to speak. "You've made everything I thought I knew about myself a lie. Every time I felt proud of how we were handling our finances, every time I felt grateful for our good luck, every time I thought I was becoming a competent adult who could manage her own life, it was all fake." Madison stopped pacing and turned to face me directly. "And the worst part is, you've been watching me feel proud of myself for accomplishments that weren't mine. You've been listening to me talk about how independent and capable I've become, and you never said a word. You just let me make a fool of myself." "You're not a fool," I said, tears starting to flow. "You are capable and independent. I just wanted to what? To prove that I'm not? Because that's what you've done, Mom. You've proven that left to my own devices, I would have failed. That my judgment about what James and I could afford was wrong. That my planning abilities were inadequate. That I needed my mommy to save me from my own incompetence. That's not true, isn't it?" Madison's voice was cold again. "If I'm so capable, why couldn't you trust me to plan my own wedding? If I'm so independent, why did you feel the need to orchestrate every detail? If I'm such a competent adult, why have you been treating me like a child who needs to be managed?" I had no answer because she was right. Every action I'd taken had been based on the assumption that Madison couldn't handle things on her own, that she needed my intervention to succeed. "I thought I was helping," I said lamely. "You thought you were helping yourself," Madison replied. "You missed feeling important in my life, so you found a way to make yourself essential without me knowing it. You got to be the fairy godmother and the grateful recipient of my happiness, all while pretending to respect my boundaries." Madison pulled out her phone and started typing rapidly. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Texting James, telling him to meet us at home. He needs to hear this too, since apparently our entire engagement has been funded by my mother's inability to let me live my own life. Madison, please what? Please don't tell my fiancé that our wedding is a sham. Please keep pretending that I'm competent enough to plan my own life. Please continue living this lie that you've created." She finished typing and looked at me with exhausted disappointment. "Mom, I don't even know who I am anymore. I thought I was someone who could stretch a budget and make smart choices and create something beautiful with the person I love. But apparently, I'm someone who needs $38,000 of secret assistance to plan a wedding." "You are all of those things," I insisted. "The money doesn't change who you are. It changes everything about who I thought I was," Madison said quietly. "And it changes everything about who I thought you were too." We drove to Madison's apartment in separate cars, the silence in my vehicle filled with the sound of my world crumbling. By the time I arrived, James was already there. and from the look on his face, I could tell that Madison had filled him in during the drive. "Mrs. Hartwell," James said when I walked into their living room. His voice was carefully neutral, but I could see the strain around his eyes. "Madison told me what happened at the catering company." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "I need you to know that I suspected something was going on," James continued. "I called you a few weeks ago because I'd noticed some inconsistencies, but I had no idea about the scope of everything." Madison was standing by the window, looking out. At the parking lot, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. "We need to figure out what to do now," she said without turning around. "The wedding is in 3 weeks. Everything is already arranged and paid for. By you." "We could cancel," James suggested quietly. "We could postpone until we can afford to. Do it ourselves. Cancel our wedding 3 weeks beforehand because my mother has been secretly funding it." Madison turned around, and I could see that she'd been crying. "Do you know how humiliating that would be? Do you know what people would think?" "Does it matter what people think?" I asked. Madison laughed bitterly. Rich question coming from someone who's been orchestrating my life to avoid any chance of public failure. She was right again, and we all knew it. "So what do we do?" James asked. Madison was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but cold. "We go through with the wedding. We smile and pretend everything is wonderful, because the alternative is to humiliate ourselves and waste $38,000 of Mom's money." "Madison," I started. "But," she continued, cutting me off, "things are going to be different. Very different." She turned to face me fully, and the look in her eyes made my heart sink. "I don't want you in any of the family photos, Mom. I don't want formal pictures with someone who's been lying to me for months. I don't want to look back at my wedding album and remember this betrayal every time I see your face." The words were like a knife to my heart, but I knew I deserved them. "And after the wedding," Madison continued, "I think we need to take a break from each other. I need time to figure out who I actually am when you're not secretly managing my life." "How long of a break?" I whispered. "I don't know. Maybe a long one." James reached for Madison's hand, and she let him take it, but her eyes never left mine. "I trusted you," she said simply. "And you used that trust to manipulate me. I don't know how to forgive that. I don't even know if I want to." As I drove home that evening through the darkening streets of Denver, I realized that in trying to give Madison everything, I had lost the only thing that truly mattered: her respect, her trust, and her love. The wedding I had spent $38,000 to create was going to happen exactly as planned. Every detail would be perfect. Every moment captured beautifully by Marcus Rivera's expert photography. And I would be invisible in it all, just as I had been invisible in the planning. But this time, it wouldn't be by choice. The 3 weeks following. The confrontation at Bella Vista Catering passed in a strange, suspended animation. Madison and I existed in the same orbit, but on completely different planes. Both of us going through the motions of wedding preparation while carefully avoiding any real contact. She stopped calling on Sundays. When wedding-related communication was absolutely necessary, she texted me brief formal messages that read like business correspondence. "Ceremony starts at 4 p.m., reception immediately following. Please confirm your attendance." I responded with equally sterile confirmations, both of us maintaining the pretense that this was normal pre-wedding logistics, rather than the careful choreography of two people trying to minimize contact while sharing the same devastating secret. The vendors, oblivious to the family drama their services had triggered, continued their preparations with professional efficiency. Marcus Rivera called twice to discuss photography schedules, but I let both calls go to voicemail. I couldn't bear to hear his voice asking questions about family photo arrangements that I now knew I wouldn't be part of. Carol noticed the change immediately during our Tuesday lunch at Bistro Vendôme. "You look like someone died," she said bluntly, setting down her menu and studying my face with concern. "And you've lost more weight. Eleanor, what's happening?" I'd been dreading this conversation. Carol had been warning me for months about the unsustainable path I was on with Madison's wedding, and now I had to admit that every one of her concerns had come to pass in the worst possible way. "Madison found out," I said quietly. Carol's face went through a rapid succession of expressions: surprise, concern, and then something that looked almost like relief. "How?" I told her about the catering company, about Madison walking in on me reviewing contracts, about the $38,000 revelation and the devastating conversation that followed. "And now she doesn't want me in any family photos," I finished. "She says she needs a break from our relationship, maybe a long one." Carol was quiet for a moment, processing everything I'd told her. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentler than I'd expected. "Eleanor, I'm sorry this happened the way it did. I really am. But honey, are you surprised?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean that for months I've been watching you build a house of cards. A beautiful, expensive house of cards, but still something that was bound to collapse eventually." Carol leaned forward, her expression serious but kind. "The real question isn't how Madison found out. It's what you're going to do now." "What can I do? She doesn't want to see me. She doesn't trust me. I've ruined everything." "Have you?" I stared at Carol, confused by the question. "Eleanor, what exactly have you ruined? Your relationship with Madison? Because from where I'm sitting, you haven't had a real relationship with Madison in years. You've had an elaborate performance where you pretended to respect her independence while secretly controlling every aspect of her life." The words stung because they were true. "What you've ruined," Carol continued, "is the illusion. The comfortable fiction that let you feel like a good mother while never actually dealing with the real issues between you and your daughter. So, you think Madison is right to cut me out?" "I think Madison is doing what she should have done years ago, setting boundaries with a mother who doesn't respect boundaries." Carol's voice was firm but not unkind. "Eleanor, you've spent this entire wedding planning process proving to Madison that you don't trust her judgment, her capabilities, or her autonomy. Why would she want you prominently featured in photos, commemorating what she now knows was your event, not hers?" I felt tears starting to form, but Carol wasn't finished. "But here's the thing. This doesn't have to be the end of the story. This could be the beginning of something real between you two. Something based on honesty instead of manipulation, respect instead of control." "How?" "She won't even talk to me." "Because right now, you're still trying to manage the situation. You're still thinking about what you can do to fix this, to make it better, to control the outcome." Carol reached across the table and took my hand. "Eleanor, the first step is accepting that you can't control this. You can't control Madison's reaction, you can't control her forgiveness, and you can't control whether she ever wants a relationship with you again. That's terrifying. I know, but it's also liberating. Because once you stop trying to control Madison's life, you can start figuring out how to live your own." That night, I sat in my home office, surrounded by the detritus of months of secret wedding planning, vendor contracts, payment receipts, timeline schedules, seating charts, all the evidence of my elaborate deception spread across my desk like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that no longer made a coherent picture. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to Madison. I wrote and deleted dozens of versions. Apologies, explanations, justifications, pleas for forgiveness. Nothing felt right. Everything I wrote still sounded like I was trying to manage her response, trying to control how she felt about what I'd done. Finally, I closed the laptop without sending anything. Carol was right. This wasn't something I could fix with the right words or the right gesture. This was something I had to let Madison work through on her own timeline, in her own way. But there was something I could control, my own actions going forward. The next morning, I made a series of phone calls that felt both terrifying and necessary. The first call was to Dr. Patricia Brennan, a therapist Carol had recommended years ago when I was struggling with empty nest syndrome after Madison left for college. I'd gone to a few sessions but stopped when I convinced myself I was fine, that I just needed to stay busy and involved. Dr. Brennan, this is Eleanor Hartwell. I saw you briefly about 4 years ago, and I was wondering if you had any availability for sessions. I think I need some help figuring out who I am when I'm not trying to be the mother I think my daughter needs. The second call was to my business partner, Jennifer. Jen, I need to take a step back from the day-to-day operations for a while. Maybe a few months, maybe longer. I need to figure some things out. Eleanor, are you okay? Is this about Madison's wedding? I'd never told Jennifer about the secret funding, but she'd noticed my distraction and stress over the past few months. It's about a lot of things, but I need to focus on my own life for a while instead of trying to manage everyone else's. The third call was the hardest one. I dialed Marcus Rivera's number and waited for him to answer. Eleanor, I was hoping you'd call back. I wanted to discuss the family photo schedule for Madison's wedding. Marcus, I need to tell you something. Madison and I had a falling out. She doesn't want me in any of the formal family photos. There was a long pause. Because she found out about the payment arrangement? Among other things. The point is, I need you to respect her wishes completely. Don't try to include me in shots she doesn't want me in. Don't try to mediate or fix anything. Just photograph her wedding the way she wants it photographed. Eleanor, I'm so sorry. I feel partially responsible for this. You're not responsible for my choices, Marcus. I put you in an impossible position, and I'm sorry for that. But please, just give Madison the wedding photography she deserves, without any interference from me. After I hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. The strange emptiness of not having someone else's crisis to manage, someone else's problem to solve, someone else's life to organize. For the first time in decades, I had to figure out what Eleanor Hartwell wanted to do with her day, her week, her life, without reference to what Madison needed or wanted or might benefit from. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done since Madison was a child. I made plans that were entirely for my own enjoyment. I drove up to the mountains, not to scout wedding venues or meet with vendors, but simply because I wanted to see the aspen leaves turning gold in the early October air. I hiked a trail I'd been meaning to explore for years, ate lunch at a small cafe overlooking a valley filled with autumn colors, and spent the afternoon reading a novel on a park bench without checking my phone once. As I watched the sunset, over the Rocky Mountains painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I realized that this was the first time in months that I'd experienced pure, uncomplicated enjoyment. No ulterior motives, no secret agendas, no one else's happiness to orchestrate. The wedding was now just over a week away, and I still had no idea what role I would play in it, if any. Madison had confirmed my attendance but made it clear that my presence would be tolerated rather than welcomed. I would sit somewhere in the back, witness my daughter's marriage from a distance, and then... what? For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future where Madison and I might not have a relationship at all, where the break she'd mentioned might become permanent, where I might never see my future grandchildren, where the daughter I'd devoted my life to might choose to live that life without me in it. The thought was agonizing, but it was also clarifying. If I was going to lose Madison anyway, I might as well lose her honestly. I might as well stop pretending that our relationship was something it wasn't. Stop trying to manufacture connection through secret gestures and hidden support. Dr. Brennan had scheduled our first session for the Monday before the wedding. As I sat in her comfortable office with its soft lighting and carefully neutral decor, she asked me a question that stopped me cold. Eleanor, when you think about your identity, who are you when you're not Madison's mother? I opened my mouth to answer and realized I had no idea. I'm a businesswoman, I said finally. I own an event planning company. What else? I struggled to think of other defining characteristics that didn't somehow relate to Madison or my role as her mother. I'm a widow, I said, then realized how pathetic that sounded as an identity marker. Dr. Brennan waited patiently while I grappled with the question. I think that might be part of the problem, I admitted. I think I've been Madison's mother for so long that I forgot how to be anything else. And when she started pulling away, instead of letting her go and figuring out who else I could be, I just tried harder to be the mother I thought she needed. Even when she made it clear she didn't want or need that kind of mothering? Especially then, I said, the truth hitting me like a physical blow. The more she pulled away, the more desperate I became to prove that she still needed me. And what did that desperation lead you to do? It led me to spend $38,000 on a wedding that was supposed to represent her independence, while making sure she was never actually independent enough to fail. Dr. Brennan nodded thoughtfully. Eleanor, what would it look like to love Madison without needing her to need you? The question echoed in my mind as I drove home from the session. What would it look like to love Madison without needing her to need me? What would it look like to be proud of her success without requiring credit for it? What would it look like to respect her boundaries even when those boundaries excluded me? That night, I made one final decision about the wedding. I would attend, as Madison had requested. I would sit in the back and witness her marriage to James. I would smile and be gracious and celebrate their happiness without inserting myself into their moment. And then I would let Madison choose what came next, without trying to influence that choice through grand gestures or strategic interventions. For the first time in months, I felt something that might have been peace. Not happiness. I was still heartbroken about the state of my relationship with Madison. But peace in knowing that I was finally going to stop trying to control outcomes I had no right to control. The wedding was in 6 days. Whatever happened after that would be up to Madison. And for the first time in her adult life, I was going to trust her to make that decision without my interference. It was terrifying, it was necessary, and it was long overdue. The ripple effects of my decision to step back began almost immediately, and they spread far beyond my relationship with Madison. Jennifer called me on Tuesday morning, 3 days after I'd told her I was taking a leave of absence from Hartwell events. Eleanor, we have a problem, she said, her voice tight with stress. The Morrison anniversary party is this weekend, and Mrs. Morrison is asking specifically for you. She says she won't work with anyone else. I was sitting in my kitchen, having my morning coffee and reading a book, something I hadn't done during a workday in years. The normalcy of Jennifer's crisis felt strange and distant, like hearing about someone else's life. Can you handle it? Jen? You've managed events of that size before. That's not the point. Mrs. Morrison has been a client for 8 years. She expects you to be there personally. Jennifer paused, and I could hear the frustration in her voice. Eleanor, I don't understand what's happening. You've never just walked away from a client before. Is this about Madison's wedding? Because if something's wrong, we can work around it. I realized that Jennifer, like most people in my life, had no idea about the depth of the crisis I was experiencing. To the outside world, I was Eleanor Hartwell, successful businesswoman, devoted mother, woman who had her life together. No one knew that I'd been slowly unraveling for months. Tell Mrs. Morrison that I'm dealing with a family situation and that you have my complete confidence and authority, I said firmly. If she's not comfortable with that arrangement, she's welcome to find another event planner. The silence on the other end of the phone was telling. In 15 years of partnership, I'd never suggested that we should be willing to lose a client. Eleanor, are you sure you're okay? This doesn't sound like you. Maybe that's the problem, I said quietly. Maybe I need to figure out who I actually am, instead of who everyone expects me to be. After I hung up, I realized that stepping away from work was revealing something I hadn't anticipated. My entire professional identity had become another form of control and people-pleasing. I'd built Hartwell Events into a company where I was indispensable, where clients expected my personal involvement in every detail, where my worth was measured by my ability to solve other people's problems perfectly. Just like with Madison, I'd created a dynamic where my value was tied to my usefulness. The pattern was everywhere once I started looking for it. My friendship with Carol had developed into a relationship where I was the one who always listened, always gave advice, always provided support. My neighbors called me when they needed event planning recommendations. My hairdresser asked me to help coordinate her daughter's quinceañera. Even my mailman had started asking about flower arrangements for his wife's birthday. I'd become the person everyone turned to when they needed something handled, something organized, something fixed. And I'd cultivated that reputation because it made me feel valuable, necessary, important. But what happened when you stopped being useful? What happened when you withdrew from the role of universal problem solver? I was about to find out. Carol called Wednesday afternoon, concerned about my absence from our usual Tuesday lunch. "You missed yesterday," she said without preamble. "Are you sick?" "No, I needed some time to think. About Madison's wedding? About everything." I took a deep breath. "Carol, I realized something yesterday. We've been friends for 8 years, and I know everything about your life, your divorce, your kids, your job stress, your dating disasters. But do you know anything about my life that doesn't involve solving someone else's problems?" Carol was quiet for a moment. "Eleanor, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that even our friendship has become about me being your sounding board and advice giver. When's the last time you asked me how I was doing? Really asked. Not just as a conversation starter before telling me about your latest crisis?" Carol started, then stopped. "You always seem like you have everything together. You never need advice. Or maybe I never created space for anyone to offer it because I was too busy being the person who gives advice instead of the person who needs it." After we hung up, I realized that conversation had been harder than my therapy session. Dr. Brennan was paid to listen to my problems and help me work through them. But with Carol, with Jennifer, with everyone else in my life, I'd never allowed myself to be the one who needed support. Thursday brought another revelation when Mrs. Chen from the string quartet called my office. "Mrs. Hartwell, I wanted to confirm the final details for Saturday's wedding," she said. "We're all very excited to perform for such a special event." I felt a familiar pang of guilt. Mrs. Chen and her musicians were expecting to be paid their full fee, money I'd promised them while telling Madison they were students playing for experience. "Mrs. Chen, there's been a change in circumstances. I need to make sure you understand that your full payment is coming from me personally, not from the bride or groom." "Oh," she said, sounding confused. "Is there a problem with the arrangement?" "No. Problem? I just want to be completely transparent about the payment source." I paused, realizing I was about to do something I'd never done before in a professional context. "Mrs. Chen, can I ask you something? Do you think it's ethical to provide services that someone believes they're getting for free when actually a third party is secretly paying for them?" There was a long pause. "Mrs. Hartwell, are you asking me whether this arrangement is ethical?" "I'm asking because I'm not sure anymore. I arranged for your services without the bride's knowledge, and she believes you're performing as students rather than as the professional musicians you are." "Well," Mrs. Chen said carefully, "it's not uncommon for family members to contribute to wedding costs, but usually the couple knows about it. And when they don't know, then it becomes complicated. The couple can't give informed consent to gifts they don't know they're receiving." Informed consent. The phrase hit me like a revelation. I'd been making decisions on Madison's behalf without her informed consent for months. I'd been solving problems she didn't know existed, making choices about her life without involving her in those choices. In trying to protect Madison from financial stress and wedding planning difficulties, I'd robbed her of the right to make her own informed decisions about what she could afford and what kind of wedding she actually wanted. Friday morning, the day before the wedding, brought the most difficult consequence of my withdrawal: silence from Madison. In the past, the day before a major event, Madison would have called me multiple times. She would have wanted to talk through last-minute details, share her excitement and nervousness, maybe even ask for some motherly reassurance. But my phone remained silent. I found myself checking it obsessively, hoping for a text, a call, anything. That might indicate that Madison wanted some connection with me before her wedding day, but there was nothing. At 2 p.m., I finally broke and sent a text. "Thinking of you today. I hope you're feeling excited and happy." No response. At 4 p.m., I tried again. "Let me know if you need anything at all." Nothing. At 6 p.m., my phone finally buzzed with a message, and my heart leaped. But it wasn't from Madison. It was from James. "Mrs. Hartwell, Madison asked me to confirm that you're still planning to attend tomorrow. The ceremony starts at 4 p.m. at Evergreen Valley Ranch. She wanted me to let you know that there will be assigned seating at the reception." Assigned seating. Translation: you'll sit where we put you, with people we choose, at a distance we determine is appropriate. I texted back, "Yes, I'll be there. Thank you for letting me know." Then I sat on my couch and cried for the first time since this whole crisis had begun. Not the careful, controlled tears I'd shed during therapy, or the frustrated tears from moments of anger. Deep, grieving sobs for the relationship I'd lost, the daughter who felt like a stranger, and the future I'd imagined that would never exist. I cried for the little girl who used to run to me when she was hurt, who used to ask me to read her the same bedtime story every night for 3 months straight, who used to say that when she grew up, she wanted to live next door to me forever. I cried for all the ways I'd failed that little girl by trying so hard to take care of the adult she'd become. As the tears finally subsided, I realized that this grief was necessary. I'd been holding on to a version of Madison that didn't exist anymore, trying to maintain a relationship with a child who had grown into a woman I barely knew. The Madison who was getting married tomorrow wasn't the little girl who needed her mother to solve every problem. She was an adult who'd been clear about wanting independence, who'd set boundaries I'd repeatedly violated, who'd asked for space I'd refused to give. Tomorrow, I would attend her wedding as a guest, not as the secret architect of the event. I would witness her marriage to James without expecting gratitude for the thousands of dollars I'd spent making it possible. I would celebrate her happiness without needing credit for creating it. And then I would let her decide whether she wanted a relationship with the mother I was becoming, rather than the mother I'd been trying to be. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my sister Patricia in Phoenix, not to give her advice or solve a problem, but to ask for support. "Patty, it's Eleanor. Do you have a few minutes? I'm going through something difficult and I could use someone to talk to." The surprise in Patricia's voice was evident. "Of course, Eleanor. Are you okay? You never call asking for support." "That's part of the problem," I said, and then I told her everything. Patricia listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Eleanor," she finally said, "I love you, but I have to say something that might be hard to hear." "Go ahead." "You've been so focused on being the perfect mother that you forgot to be a real person. And you can't have a genuine relationship with someone when you're performing perfection instead of showing up as yourself." I was trying to love her the best way I knew how. I know. But love that requires you to hide who you are and manipulate circumstances isn't actually love. It's control wearing a love costume. Patricia's words stayed with me as I prepared for bed, laying out the dress I'd chosen for Madison's wedding. A simple navy blue sheath that would blend into the background, appropriate for a guest who didn't want to draw attention. Tomorrow, I would watch my daughter marry a man who truly loved her, surrounded by the beauty I'd secretly created but couldn't claim. I would smile and be gracious and celebrate their happiness. And then I would begin the long, difficult work of learning how to love Madison without needing to control her life, how to be her mother without managing her choices, how to be proud of her success without requiring credit for making it possible. It was going to be the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was also going to be the most honest thing I'd ever done, and maybe, eventually, that honesty would create space for something real between us. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October clarity that makes Colorado famous. Brilliant. Blue skies, golden aspen leaves dancing in the breeze, and air so clean it seemed to sparkle. It was, by every measure, a perfect day for a wedding. I woke at 6 a.m. without an alarm, my body thrumming with a nervous energy I couldn't shake. For months. This day had been the focal point of all my planning, worrying, and secret coordination. Now, as it finally arrived, I found myself in the surreal position of being a spectator to an event I'd largely created. I made coffee and sat on my back deck, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold. Somewhere across town, Madison was probably waking up in her apartment, surrounded by bridesmaids in the familiar chaos of wedding morning preparations. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine what it would have been like to be part of that scene, helping her into her dress, fixing her hair, sharing those precious last moments before she became someone's wife. But that version of the morning belonged to a different relationship, one that might have existed if I'd made different choices along the way. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Thinking of you today, sis. You're doing the right thing. It takes courage to love someone enough to let them go." I appreciated the support, but letting go felt like an inadequate description for what I was experiencing. This wasn't a gentle release. It was more like learning to breathe underwater, fundamentally changing how I existed in the world. At 10 a.m., I forced myself to eat breakfast, though food tasted like cardboard. At 11, I took a long shower and began the careful process of getting ready for my daughter's wedding while trying not to think too hard about what that meant. The navy dress I'd chosen felt appropriate, elegant enough for the occasion but muted, enough to blend into the background. I paired it with simple jewelry and low heels, nothing that would draw attention or suggest I was trying to compete for focus on Madison's day. As I applied my makeup, I found myself thinking about all the other wedding mornings I'd coordinated over the years. I'd been the calm presence in the background, solving last-minute crises and ensuring everything ran smoothly. I'd held countless brides' hands through pre-ceremony nerves, reassured anxious mothers, and orchestrated the complex logistics that made weddings appear effortless. Today, I would be none of those things. Today, I would simply be Eleanor, sitting in an assigned seat, watching my daughter marry the man she loved. At 2 p.m., I drove to Evergreen Valley Ranch, taking the scenic route through the mountains that had become so familiar over the past months, of secret vendor meetings. The venue looked stunning, exactly as I'd envisioned it when I first suggested it to Madison through carefully planted recommendations. The ranch sprawled across a valley floor surrounded by towering pines and aspen groves, with the Rocky Mountains providing a dramatic backdrop. White chairs were arranged in perfect rows on the lawn facing a rustic wooden arch, adorned with the cascading white roses and eucalyptus that I'd secretly funded. String lights hung between the trees, ready to create a magical atmosphere as the sunset. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly what Madison had dreamed of, and I had to pretend I was seeing it for the first time. I parked in the designated guest area and walked toward the reception tent, where I assumed someone would direct me to my assigned seat. The early arrivals were already milling around. James's, family members I recognized from previous gatherings, Madison's college friends, work colleagues, neighbors. I felt like an anthropologist observing a culture I didn't quite understand. These were people who belonged here naturally, people who had straightforward relationships with the bride and groom, People who could celebrate without the complicated baggage I carried. Mrs. Hartwell? A young woman with a clipboard approached. Me? She looked professionally cheerful in the way that suggested she was part of the wedding coordination team. I'm Sarah, the day of coordinator. Madison asked me to show you to your seat. Madison had assigned someone to handle me. The thought was both painful and oddly comforting. At least she'd thought about my presence enough to make arrangements. Sarah led me to a chair in the fourth row on the aisle, with a good view of the ceremony space but clearly positioned among the general guests rather than the family section. The message was subtle but unmistakable. You're welcome here, but you're not part of the inner circle. Can I get you anything? Sarah asked. Water? A program? I'm fine, thank you. As Sarah walked away, I realized that this was the first time in months that someone involved in Madison's wedding had asked what I needed instead of me anticipating what everyone else needed. The next hour passed in a strange suspension of time. Guests continued to arrive, filling the chairs around me with the cheerful chaos of people who were genuinely excited to be there. I recognized some faces from Madison's birthday parties and holiday gatherings over the years, but I realized I didn't really know any of these people. I'd been so focused on my relationship with Madison that I'd never bothered to build connections with the broader community of her life. At 3:45, musicians began tuning their instruments. Mrs. Chen's string quartet, looking elegant and professional in their black concert attire. Hearing the opening notes of their warm-up scales, I felt a complex mix of pride and guilt. These were extraordinary musicians, far more talented than the music students Madison believed she'd hired. The music would be beautiful, but she would never know the true caliber of what she was getting. At 3:55, the officiant took his place at the front, and the guests began to settle into expectant silence. I watched James walk down the aisle with his parents, looking nervous but happy in his charcoal gray suit. He took his position at the altar and turned to face the back of the seating area, his face bright with anticipation. The music shifted to the processional, and Madison's bridesmaids began their walk down the aisle. 3 young women I'd met briefly at various events, all dressed in dusty rose gowns that complemented the autumn setting perfectly. They moved with careful grace, smiling at the assembled guests. Then the music changed again, and everyone stood, as Madison appeared at the back of the aisle. The breath left my lungs in a rush. She was absolutely radiant. Her dress was a classic A-line with delicate lace sleeves and a flowing train that seemed to float behind her as she walked. Her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon adorned with small white flowers, and her smile was luminous with joy. But what struck me most was how confident she looked, how certain. This wasn't a nervous bride being guided through a ritual. This was a woman who knew exactly what she was doing and was delighted to be doing it. Since her father wasn't there to walk her down the aisle, Madison had chosen to walk alone, a decision that had once hurt my feelings but now seemed perfect. She was claiming this moment entirely for herself, stepping into her marriage as a complete autonomous person. I realized I was crying, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition. This was Madison as I'd always hoped she would become: strong, confident, independent, radiantly happy. The fact that her happiness didn't need me to create or maintain it was actually the greatest success I could have hoped for as her mother. As Madison reached the altar and James took her hands, I saw the pure joy on both their faces. This was exactly what love should look like: 2 whole people choosing each other freely, with no hidden manipulation or secret orchestration required. The ceremony itself was beautiful and personal. Madison and James had written their own vows, and as they spoke about building a life together based on honesty, trust, and mutual respect, I felt each word like a gentle rebuke. These were values I'd claimed to share but had violated through my months of deception. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and they shared their first kiss as a married couple, the joy on their faces was so genuine and uncomplicated. that I felt something shift inside me. This was Madison's happiness, earned and chosen and completely her own. As the recessional music began and the new couple walked back down the aisle together, Madison's eyes swept over the assembled guests. For just a moment, her gaze found mine, and something passed between us. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps acknowledgement. I was here. I was witnessing this moment, and I was letting it be hers. During the cocktail hour that followed, I found myself in the awkward position of being simultaneously an insider and an outsider. I knew intimate details about every aspect of the celebration: the caterer's signature cocktails, the florist's design philosophy, the photographer's artistic vision, but I had to pretend ignorance about all of it. "Isn't the setting gorgeous?" asked the woman sitting next to me during the ceremony, whose name I'd learned was Linda from Madison's office. Madison said they got incredibly lucky with the vendors. Everything just fell into place perfectly. "Yeah, really is beautiful," I agreed, the irony of the conversation not lost on me. Madison was telling us earlier that they're amazed at how well everything has worked out within their budget. She said it's taught them that they're more capable of managing big projects than they thought. Each comment was like a small knife, not because the speakers meant any harm, but because they highlighted the gap between Madison's perceived reality and the truth I was carrying. I excused myself and walked to the edge of the property where I could see the mountains stretching into the distance. The late afternoon light was beginning to slant through the trees, creating the golden hour that photographers dream of. Soon, Marcus Rivera would be capturing the formal portraits that would become Madison's lasting memories of this day. Portraits that would not include me. I thought about all the wedding albums I'd helped create over the years, all the family, photos that told the story of generations coming together to celebrate love. I'd always imagined that Madison's wedding album would include similar images of our small but devoted family. Instead, her album would tell a different story, one where she stood as a confident, independent woman surrounded by her chosen community, with her absent mother relegated to the background where she'd apparently always belonged. As I stood there watching the sun begin its descent toward the mountain peaks, I realized that this painful but necessary experience was teaching me something crucial about love. Real love meant celebrating Madison's happiness even when it didn't include me prominently. Real love meant being proud of her strength, even when that strength was partly built on boundaries that excluded me. For $38,000 and months of secret planning, I'd bought myself a front-row seat to watch my daughter prove that she didn't need me to orchestrate her happiness. It was the most expensive and most valuable lesson I'd ever received. The dinner bell chimed, calling guests to find their assigned seats at the reception. I took a deep breath, smoothed my navy dress, and walked back toward the celebration, ready to spend the evening learning how to love my daughter from a distance and discovering whether that might, eventually, prove to be the kind of love she could actually accept. The reception was in full swing when the first crack appeared in Madison's perfect wedding facade. I was sitting at table 12 with Linda from Madison's office and two couples I didn't know, making polite conversation about the beautiful venue and delicious food that I knew cost $68 per plate, but that Madison believed was part of a discounted package. The string quartet had transitioned to dinner music, their professional polish evident in every note, while guests enjoyed what they assumed was an incredible stroke of luck for the young couple's budget. That's when I noticed Marcus Rivera approaching. Madison and James's sweetheart table, camera in hand but looking unusually tense. Even from my distance, I could see something was wrong. Madison's posture stiffened as Marcus leaned down to speak with her, and James's face grew progressively more serious as the conversation continued. Then Madison stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor loudly enough to draw attention from nearby tables. She said something sharp to Marcus. I couldn't hear the words, but her body language was unmistakable. She was angry. James quickly followed her as she walked briskly toward the venue's main building, leaving Marcus standing alone by their table, looking like a man who'd just delivered devastating news. My stomach dropped. Whatever had just happened, I suspected it had everything to do with me. 20 minutes later, as I was picking at my dinner and trying to pretend everything was normal, James appeared at my table. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said quietly, his voice carefully controlled. "Could I speak with you privately, please?" I followed him away from the reception area to a quiet corner of the venue's main lodge. Madison was there, still in her beautiful wedding dress, but with mascara smudged under her eyes. Her bouquet lay forgotten on a nearby chair, the white roses I'd secretly selected looking wilted in the evening light. "Marcus just told us something interesting," Madison said without preamble. Her voice was deadly calm, which I'd learned was always more dangerous than when she was openly angry. "He said he couldn't stand keeping the secret anymore. He said he had to tell us the truth about who's really paying for our wedding photography." I closed my eyes, feeling the last of my carefully constructed walls crumbling. $12,000, Mom, Madison continued. "That's what you're paying Marcus for photography, while I've been bragging to everyone about how we found this amazing photographer who was giving us a special rate of $1,800. Madison, but that's not the worst part," she cut me off. "The worst part is what Marcus told us. When James asked if there were any other vendors with similar arrangements. Do you want to know what he said?" I remained silent, knowing that anything I said would only make things worse. He said, and I quote, "Mrs. Hartwell would know better than I would about the other vendors." He said he assumed we knew about all of it. He said he couldn't believe we didn't know about the floral sponsorship, the catering upgrades, the transportation, the musicians. James stepped forward, his face a mixture of anger and profound disappointment. "Mrs. Hartwell, Marcus just told us that every single vendor at our wedding has been secretly paid by you. Every single thing we thought we accomplished on our own was actually your money, your planning, your arrangements. The string quartet alone cost $3,000, Madison added, her voice rising despite her obvious effort to control it. $3,000 for what I thought were music students playing for experience. The flowers? $8,000. The catering upgrade? Over $6,000. The transportation? Nearly $3,000 more." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "We've been sitting here for 2 hours, accepting congratulations from our friends and family about how beautifully we planned our wedding, how lucky we were with vendors, how capable and responsible we are as a couple. And it's all been a lie." I found my voice finally. "Madison, I just wanted you to have the wedding you dreamed of." "You wanted me to have the wedding you dreamed of," she corrected sharply. "And you wanted to be the secret hero who made it all possible. You wanted to feel important and needed and essential, even when I specifically told you I wanted to handle things myself." James ran his hand through his hair, disturbing his carefully styled wedding look. "Mrs. Hartwell, do you understand what you've done to us? Do you understand that we now have to go back out there and continue celebrating a wedding that we didn't actually plan or pay for? Do you understand that every compliment we receive about our organization and responsibility is based on a lie? And do you understand," Madison added, her voice breaking slightly, "that I now have to live with the knowledge that my wedding, the most important day of my life, was essentially purchased by someone who I specifically asked not to interfere?" I looked at my daughter, stunning in her wedding dress but with tears streaming down her face, and realized that my $38,000 had bought something I'd never intended. It had bought the destruction of her wedding day joy. "Madison, I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to come out this way." "How did you mean for it to come out?" she asked. "Were you ever going to tell us? Were you going to let us spend the rest of our lives believing we were capable of managing something this big on our own? Were you going to watch us make financial decisions based on the false confidence you'd given us?" The questions hung in the air, each one highlighting the depth of my deception and its long-term implications. "I don't know," I admitted. "I hadn't thought that far ahead." "Because you never think beyond the immediate problem you want to solve," Madison said. You see me struggling with something, and you have to fix it, regardless of whether I want it fixed or whether fixing it might actually harm me in the long run." We stood there in silence for several minutes, the sounds of the reception continuing outside. Laughter, music, celebration that now felt like a mockery of the crisis unfolding inside. Finally, James spoke. "What do we do now? Do we tell our guests that the wedding they're enjoying was secretly funded by the mother of the bride? Do we cancel the rest of the reception? Do we pretend everything is fine?" "We can't tell people," Madison said immediately. "It would be humiliating. For all of us." She looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not disappointment, but something closer to pity. "Do you see what you've done, Mom? You've created a situation where we have no good options. We can either humiliate ourselves by telling the truth, or we can continue living a lie." "I never wanted to humiliate you," I said quietly. "But you did. Want to control me?" Madison replied. "You wanted to prove that I couldn't succeed without you. You wanted to be the invisible puppet master pulling all the strings." I wanted to deny it, but Dr. Brennan's voice echoed in my mind. "What would it look like to love Madison without needing her to need you?" "You're right," I said, the words feeling like they were being torn from my chest. "You're absolutely right. I did want to feel needed. I did want to prove that you couldn't manage without me. And I was wrong." Madison's eyes widened slightly. In all our years of conflict and disagreement, I'd never admitted to being fundamentally wrong about something important. "I was wrong about everything," I continued, feeling a strange relief in finally saying the words. "I was wrong to interfere with your wedding planning. I was wrong to lie to vendors and ask them to lie to you. I was wrong to make decisions about your life without your knowledge or consent." I took a deep breath, knowing that what I said next would determine whether there was any possibility of repairing our relationship. "But most of all, I was wrong to love you in a way that required you to be smaller, less capable, more dependent than you actually are. I was wrong to make my worth as your mother dependent on your need for my help." James and Madison exchanged a look, and I could see that my admission had caught them off guard. "Madison," I continued, "you are exactly the woman I hoped you would become when you were little. You're strong, intelligent, capable, and independent. You can plan a beautiful wedding, you can manage your finances, you can make good decisions about your life. The fact that you don't need me to do those things for you isn't a failure. It's the greatest success I could have hoped for as your mother." Madison's expression softened slightly, but her voice was still guarded when she spoke. "Then why couldn't you let me prove that to myself?" "Because I was terrified," I admitted. "I was terrified that if you didn't need me, you wouldn't want me in your life at all. I was terrified that if I wasn't useful, I wasn't valuable. I was terrified that you'd grown up and moved on and left me behind." "So you decided to force your way back into relevance by making yourself secretly essential," Madison said. "Yes, and I was wrong. I was selfish and manipulative and wrong." We stood there for another long moment, the weight of honesty settling between us. Finally, Madison spoke. "Mom, what scares me isn't that you spent the money. What scares me is that you were willing to let me live a lie indefinitely. What scares me is that you watched me feel proud of accomplishments that weren't mine and never felt guilty enough to tell me the truth." "I did feel guilty," I said, "every day. But I also felt happy. Watching you be excited about the wedding, hearing you talk about how well everything was going, seeing you confident and proud. It made me happy, even though I knew it was based on deception." "That's the part I can't forgive," Madison said quietly. "Not the money, not even the lies to the vendors. It's that you were content to let me be proud of something that wasn't real." I nodded, understanding finally that the money was the least of my sins. The real damage was to Madison's sense of herself, her confidence in her own capabilities, her trust in her own perceptions. "What can I do to fix this?" I asked. "I don't know if you can," Madison replied. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust my own judgment again. Every time something goes well in my life, I'm going to wonder if you're secretly behind it. Every time I feel proud of something I've accomplished, I'm going to question whether it was really my accomplishment. The full scope of what I'd done hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't just manipulated Madison's wedding. I'd undermined her fundamental trust in her own competence. But, Madison continued, there is something you can do going forward. Anything? I said immediately. You can stop. You can stop trying to manage my life from behind the scenes. You can stop solving problems I haven't asked you to solve. You can stop being the person who knows better than I do what I need. And if I do that, if I really step back and let you live your own life, Madison was quiet for a long moment. Then maybe eventually we can figure out what kind of relationship we actually want to have with each other. Not the relationship you think we should have, not the relationship I've been too polite to refuse, but something real and honest and chosen by both of us. The rest of the reception passed in a surreal haze. Madison and James returned to their celebration, putting on brave faces for their guests while processing the revelation that their entire wedding was built on deception. I returned to my assigned table, making small talk about the beautiful flowers and delicious food while carrying the weight of knowing exactly how much each element had cost and who had really paid for it. Marcus Rivera approached me near the end of the evening, as guests were beginning to leave and the cleanup was starting. "Mrs. Hartwell, I need to apologize," he said. "I know you asked me to keep our arrangement confidential, but I couldn't watch Madison and James accept congratulations for planning something they didn't actually plan. It felt too dishonest." "You did the right thing, Marcus," I said, and I meant it. Someone should have told them the truth, and I should have done it months ago. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now I learn how to be Madison's mother without being her secret manager," I replied. "I learn how to love her without needing to control her life." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Hartwell, your heart was in the right place. You just loved her in the wrong language." 2 weeks. After the wedding, I did something I'd never done before. I wrote Madison a letter. Not an email, not a text, but an actual handwritten letter that I mailed to her apartment. "Dear Madison, I've been thinking about what you said on your wedding day about learning to trust your own judgment again. I realize that my actions have damaged something more precious than I understood: your confidence in yourself. I want you to know that every good decision you've made in your adult life has been yours. Your choice of college major, your job, your apartment, your relationship with James, all of those were your decisions based on your judgment, and they were all good decisions. The fact that I occasionally interfered with logistics doesn't diminish your wisdom in making the important choices. You chose well when you chose James. You chose well when you chose your career path. You chose well when you set boundaries with me, even though I didn't respect them. I'm starting therapy to understand why I felt such a need to control your life and to learn how to love you without needing to manage you. I don't know how long this process will take, but I want you to know that I'm committed to becoming the mother you actually need, not the mother I think you should need. Take all the time you need to figure out what kind of relationship you want with me. I'll be here when and if you're ready, and I'll respect whatever boundaries you set. With love and respect for the amazing woman you've become." Mom Madison didn't respond to the letter, and I didn't expect her to. But 3 weeks later, I received a text. "Started couples counseling with James to process the wedding situation. Therapist suggested that when we're ready, we might do a session with you to talk about family dynamics. Not ready yet, but maybe someday." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was possibility. It was Madison leaving the door open for a future relationship built on honesty rather than manipulation. I was in my office at Hartwell Events. I'd returned to work after 3 months of therapy and personal reflection, when Jennifer knocked on my door. "Eleanor, there's a Madison Mitchell here to see you. She says she's your daughter?" My heart stopped. Madison had never visited my office unannounced, and hearing her referred to by her married name was still startling. "Send her in, please." Madison walked into my office looking confident and professional in a navy blazer and dark jeans. She'd cut her hair into a stylish bob that made her look older, more serious. Marriage suited her. There was a settledness about her that hadn't been there before. "Hi, Mom," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Hi, sweetheart. This is a surprise. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by." She paused, looking around my office at the event photos covering the walls, the awards and certificates, the evidence of a successful business built on helping other people create perfect celebrations. "I've never really seen where you work. It's impressive." "Thank you. How are you? How's James?" "We're good. Really good, actually." Madison smiled, and it was the first genuine smile I'd seen from her since before the wedding. "We finished our couples counseling last month, and it helped a lot. We learned some things about communication and trust that we probably should have learned before we got married, but better late than never." I nodded, not sure where this conversation was heading. 1. Of the things we talked about was forgiveness, Madison continued. "Not just forgiving you, but forgiving ourselves for not recognizing what was happening sooner." "Madison, you had no reason to suspect." "Actually, we did," she interrupted gently. "James noticed inconsistencies from the beginning, and I dismissed them because I wanted to believe we were just really lucky. We both ignored red flags because we liked the version of ourselves that could plan a perfect wedding on a tight budget." This was news to me. "What do you mean?" "I mean that on some level, I knew things were going too well. I knew that photographer was too good for the price we were paying. I knew that vendors don't usually offer such generous discounts to strangers. But I wanted to believe we were special, that we were somehow exempt from the usual rules of budgeting and planning." Madison leaned forward in her chair. "The therapist helped me understand that I participated in the deception by not asking harder questions when things seemed too good to be true. That doesn't make what I did right." "No, it doesn't. But it helps me understand that the situation was more complicated than just you lying to me. It was also about me being willing to accept a version of reality that felt good, even when it didn't quite make sense." We sat in silence for a moment, processing this new understanding. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you become an event planner?" The question seemed to come out of nowhere. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what drew you to this work? What do you love about it?" I thought for a moment. "I love creating perfect moments for people. I love taking their vision and making it reality, solving problems they don't even know they have, ensuring that their special day goes exactly as they dreamed." Madison nodded slowly. "That's what I thought. And do your clients know about all the behind-the-scenes work you do? Do they know about the vendor negotiations and the timeline coordination and all the problems you solve that they never see?" Of course they do. That's what they're paying me for." "Right. They have informed consent. They know they're hiring you to manage details and solve problems. They're grateful for your expertise because they asked for it and they're paying for it." I began to see where she was going with this. "But with me," Madison continued, "you were doing the same work, creating perfect moments, solving problems, making dreams come true, but without my knowledge or consent. You were treating me like a client instead of like your daughter." The insight hit me like a revelation. I had been treating Madison like a client whose event I was secretly coordinating, rather than like an adult daughter whose autonomy I should have been respecting. "You're right," I said. "I was using my professional skills to manage your personal life. And the thing is, Mom, you're really good at what you do professionally. Your clients rave about you. You create beautiful, meaningful events that people remember for the rest of their lives." Madison smiled. "You just applied those skills in the wrong context." "So what do we do now?" I asked. Madison was quiet for a moment, then reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "James and I have some news," she said, handing me the envelope. "We wanted you to be among the first to know." With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside was an ultrasound photo and a note in Madison's handwriting. "Baby Mitchell arriving March 2025. I looked up at Madison, tears already forming. "You're pregnant?" 12 weeks, she confirmed, her face glowing with happiness. "Oh, Madison, congratulations. I'm so happy for you both." "Thank you." She paused, then added, "And Mom? This time we'd like your help. Your real help, not your secret help." James and I have been talking, and we realized that we actually do want guidance from someone with experience. We want to ask questions and get advice, and learn from someone who's been through this before. I could barely speak through my tears. "You want my help?" "We want your help as a grandmother, not as a secret fairy godmother. We want to make decisions together, with full knowledge of what things cost and what options are available. We want to be honest about what we can afford and what we might need help with." "I would love that," I whispered. "There will be boundaries," Madison added firmly, "and there will be consequences if those boundaries aren't respected. But we'd like to try building a relationship based on honesty and mutual respect." "What kind of boundaries?" "No surprise payments for things. No arrangements with vendors that we don't know about. No solving problems we haven't asked you to solve." Madison's voice was firm but not unkind. "And in exchange, we'll be honest about when we need help and gracious about accepting it when it's offered transparently." I nodded, understanding that this was my chance, perhaps my only chance, to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of truth rather than manipulation. "There's something else," Madison said. "We'd like you to plan the baby shower." I stared at her in surprise. "Really?" "Really. We want you to do what you do best, create a beautiful celebration that brings people together. But we want to be involved in every decision, and we want to pay you for your services just like any other client would." The offer was more generous than I deserved, and we both knew it. "Madison, I would be honored. And I promise, complete transparency. No surprises, no secret upgrades, no mysterious discounts. Just honest event planning for my daughter and son-in-law." Madison smiled. "Good, because this baby is going to need a grandmother who knows how to love without controlling, who can give advice without manipulating, and who can celebrate our victories without needing credit for making them possible." As Madison left my office that day, I realized that she had given me something more valuable than forgiveness. She had given me a roadmap for how to love her honestly, how to be useful without being manipulative, how to be involved without being invasive. It would take time to rebuild the trust I'd broken. It would take practice to love Madison without needing to control her. But for the first time in years, I felt like we were moving toward something real. A relationship between two adults who respected each other's autonomy and chose to be in each other's lives. As I watched her walk to her car through my office window, I understood that the most expensive lesson I'd ever learned was also the most valuable. Love that requires secrecy isn't love. It's control disguised as care. But love that can exist in the light, with boundaries and honesty and mutual respect, is strong enough to survive even the deepest betrayal. Madison was going to be an incredible mother, and I was going to learn how to be the grandmother she needed, present but not invasive, helpful but not controlling, loving without strings attached. It was going to be the hardest and most important work of my life. And this time, I was going to do it right. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.